Just for a quick moment of clarity, I come from the Sustainable Development Foundation. We run a host of different organizations, including Passive House Trust and others, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products. So I'm standing in for Simon Corby, who is ill, so you're stuck with me, I'm afraid. And Charlie has nicely led us in to what I'm going to focus on. And I'm going to particularly focus on that design for deconstruction part. As the ASBP, we do work on materials from natural sources, from other waste streams. We do have a project looking at the use of denim in insulation and so on. We're working with Duncan Baker-Brown, so we do that side of things as well. But I'm going to be specifically focusing on our work on design for deconstruction today and see how we can make that work or not. I'm going to talk through our early research and then look particularly at the barriers, and then I'm going to go on to how we think we might be able to solve those barriers as a second part. And we started doing research on this a long time ago, but in the recent past, we started doing work on, we called it refab. You might like that name on logo or not, but that's what we started with. And we started to look at this idea of flexible life buildings and looking at the whole building. Can you make the whole building be reusable and redeployable in whole or in part? We did some research projects through what was then the TSB, and there were a number of little projects that we looked at. We looked particularly at a house, how you would design a house to be reusable. We had some architects working on this, a number of universities as well as our partners. There's a little video that shows you where we got to in the scope of being able to create a redeployable house, a reusable house. And then at stage 2, we started looking at these business case questions that has been raised. It's absolutely the critical point. How do we make people want to move to a model to design for deconstruction from where we are at the minute? It's such a shift from where we are. And actually, there are lots of barriers that stop people from doing that. So we moved on to look at something that we thought might be an easy part of that equation. We started to look at steel. I think Michael Sansom from the Steel Construction Institute is in the audience. And the reason we started to look at steel is because of the numbers involved in steel in construction. So it's one of the foremost construction resources in that supply chain. It is 25% of construction CO2 emissions come from steel. So in terms of circular economy and other impacts for climate change, steel is a really critical factor. We need to work out how to be able to reuse that product. And that just shows you exactly what I've just said in terms of steel being one of the critical materials and the amount of CO2 emissions. I'm not going to go into it. One of the projects in South London that you'll all know from Bill Dunster's day and Bioregional, so BedZ, they reused steel on that project. And they saved 81 tons of CO2 equivalent on that project at a cost-neutral basis. So there's quite a lot of lessons from that we took. And there's been some recent research done by Jonathan Cullen and his team at the University of Cambridge and others, lots of others. And they looked at, in the existing building stock, how could you reclaim steel from those buildings during the deconstruction process? And as part of our work, we went on a site visit to a project that had got steel bolted together as its structure, and even then, it's not taken apart in that way, because the speed of deconstruction, the business case for doing the work, means you've got to get in there and get it taken down as fast as possible, as safely as possible. So they use high-reach grabs, and they use saws to cut it, even if it's bolted together. So you change the structure of the steel and its structural properties as you take it apart, almost by default in our current ways of working. This is another piece of work by Daniel Densley-Tingley from Sheffield University. This is a list of all the barriers they found to structural steel reuse in the construction sector. And the point is, you can't read them, and that's the point I'm trying to get at. There are a lot of barriers to this. And if you think about steel, or you could think about windows, if you look at trying to take a window out of an existing building and then reusing it somewhere else, is it the right size? Is it in the right place? Does it have the right performance characteristics for the new future use? It becomes a really very tricky question. Many of the barriers that I've just mentioned, some of them are technical barriers, And then there are a whole host of other barriers around that as well. So for existing buildings, reclaiming and reusing those products in a high value use, I think is very tricky. So we've left that to other people to do for a while, including Duncan, and we do work with him on those. I'm not absolving us of that completely. But I wanted to then look at this idea of the design for deconstruction and reuse. So starting with new build now, can we just look at it in a completely different way and say, okay, let's just design them in a different way. So they can be taken apart, and you can put them together in different configurations, and then you can just use half of it here, and then use half of it somewhere else. And there are some examples. We heard a few from Charlie. There's a couple in the UK as well. So the Segro building, they took a building, literally the whole building, and just relocated it on a business park in the UK, in exactly the same configuration. They just wanted it somewhere else in the park. Great example. Saved them a lot of money. That's the business case. That's why they did it. And these are the effects that it had in terms of saving your CO2 emissions and the cost. You can see it was actually cheaper, 25% cheaper to do it, to move it, than to build a new one. Huge savings in CO2 emissions and in terms of the materials used as well. There's some demountable housing. You might think that housing is going to last for hundreds of years, but not necessarily if it's a temporary housing provision, particularly for social reasons in a local area. This is in London, in Ladywell. They're saying this is going to last for 5 years while they work out their master plan of what they want to put in the area for mixed use. So this has been designed to be dismantleable as well. And then this is the building that they use to promote housing, so the show home on a housing estate, and can again be dismantled and used as a show home on another housing site. So there are some examples, but what you'll notice about them all, and even on this one actually, even the pilings, they've gone for flat pilings that are they are effectively flexible pilings that you can move. So they've gone for a different approach to drilled pilings. And there's another example. The thing about all of these buildings, though, is at the minute that they're all one-offs. They're all for a very specific purpose. And actually, in general, then that isn't going to work for everybody in all cases. So the question is, how do we get this to be a broad approach across the whole sector, whole industry? So what those buildings have shown, and what the buildings that Charlie and others have talked about, is that you can overcome those technical barriers. But even when you get past those technical barriers, and it's great, it's great that we need to do that. We need to work out how to do that. The research project on BAMB outside, the buildings as material banks, it's great that people are working on that. We have to do that. But even when you do that, there's still these kind of market forces, business case barriers that are stopping us getting there. So the perceptions of quality, the lack of warranties, who's going to warranty the second use of that material in the next building? Who's going to do the testing? Where is it going to be? How are you going to know you've got the right amount of what you need? And actually, policy and incentives and so on just aren't there. And this is where we've decided to focus our attentions. And it's not on policy at the moment. We don't think that central government is going to drive this at the minute. So where we're going at the moment is on trying to drive client demand. If we look at those sectors, whether that be retail, which are changing over their buildings very quickly, or the MOD, when they're doing redeployment of their buildings, or schools, where they're flexing their populations of children and they need some extra buildings and then they don't need them again in 5 years' time, can we get a critical mass of clients to commit enough spend to make these flexible life buildings, these deconstructible buildings, and help them to do that, to drive change over the next 3 to 5 years? And then support that, we need all the supply chain work that's been mentioned by the Arab, also by BAM outside, to be able to give the clients confidence that we can deliver the change they want. But until that demand comes, why would I, as a manufacturer, why would I change my processes to make the components be deconstructible? Why would I do that? Well, most of my demand is still going down the other route. So we're trying to create a huge market for the new products and get the commitment from clients to drive that change. So, if anyone wants to help us, come and join in. If you've got a client who's willing to do it, come and talk to us. And at that point, I'm going to hand back to the chair. Thank you.